Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Christ is risen. You know, while you're here and you just heard this gospel reading, I wanted to bring out a few important things about this reading that speak to us and really speak to who the person of Christ is and what he was saying to this woman. Now, Christ, because he's God and because we are the created, knows exactly who we are, more so than we care to admit for ourselves. He can see through our facades of who we purport ourselves to be to others. He sees through our hearts even when we are yet to understand who we are. He knows what our deepest feelings are and what our deepest senses are. So he sees this woman come to the well, excuse me, and he asks her several questions, but he sees her as a person who has almost got it together. She almost has the understanding of who God is. But, as so many times we see in the church especially, and we see it not only in the Orthodox Church, but we see it in so many other religions as well, is they almost have it together. But there's something wrong. There's something off. And what we see with this woman is that she knows about the Messiah coming. She knows about Jacob's well. She knows about the prophets. She knows about the mountain where she's standing is a holy mountain. But there's something off. The life isn't there. She's not living the life of a godly person, because we see that in the fact that she's been through 5 husbands, and the person that she's living with now is not her husband. And Christ identifies that. So, he sees the fact that she has book knowledge, but she has no experience in the faith. She's got, as they say, the theory, but not the practice. And that in Christianity is deadly, because it doesn't matter how much you know about God, but it's about how much you know God and how much you live the life with God. So we see Christ, and he's saying to her over and over, this is this. Follow this. And he says to her, one of the few times in the gospel that we see where he says, I am he. I am Christ. Because she says, the Messiah is coming. I know, I've heard about it. And he says, he who is speaking to you now is he. I mean, how much more clear could you be of that? And then what does she do? She leaves again. And in the gospel it says that she goes and tells the other Samaritans, she says, come see the man who told me all I ever did, which he didn't. But then she says a follow-up line again, which is so disappointing. She says, could this be the Christ? When he said to her, I am the Christ. So we see that reading does not save our souls. Understanding that Christ will come and understanding that the church is here will not save your souls. It's about the relationship with God and that understanding and that coming to him and saying, I know what you're telling me, and let me tell you my feelings so that you can help me grow. That is what creates a relationship with God. And I've mentioned this many times, but you know, there's a lot of scholars of the New Testament who are Jewish, who don't believe. And we see that there's a lot of people in many practices and fields in the world who have the book knowledge, but they don't necessarily believe what they're doing. And we see that with the downfall of so many companies. We see that in the downfall of so many clergy as well, and not only in the Orthodox faith, but faiths throughout the world. We see that with the extremists in other religions. And we see that as being, what do they know and what do they live? And that is a great dichotomy in our day and age. And we can separate ourselves. Somehow it's become this talent of separating ourselves from believing and following from the book knowledge. And the two come together. You come to church, you pray the liturgy, you listen to the prayers, you listen to the gospel, and you read on your own, you study. Hopefully you say your own prayers at night. But those are tools to help us get closer to God. And if you look at it, it's very similar to the cell phone nowadays. You look in the early days, before we had cell phones, before we had all these wireless things, internet and all these things like that, people would tell stories about their family verbally. Maybe even some of you did that. You passed stories down verbally so that you heard it, you absorbed it, and you passed it down to the next generation. So now with the advent of technology, we have cell phones to communicate better. And what do? We communicate less. We send text messages, yes, no, get milk, what time are you coming home? And it's instantaneous messages back and forth. But the relationship is not there. We see that with emails. The absence of the presence of a person on an email, or automated phone calls. If you've ever had the unfortunate instance of calling a credit card company because there was an erroneous charge, or you had to deal with something, and it says, hello, you have reached, press 9 for this, and then it brings you to another menu. And by the time you get done, you have a callus on your index finger from pressing all the buttons trying to talk to a human being. And even in the hospitals nowadays, when I try to call patients in the hospital, you get this runaround of push this for this, and push the bed number, and push this. And no one wants to talk to anybody anymore. And the same thing with our life in the church. Sometimes we forget that the rules of dealing with people and business are not the rules that save us in our dealings with God. You can't send God a text message, forgive me, enter, send it off. Or an email, forgive everything I did, gone. It's about coming face to face with God in your prayers, in the sacraments of the church, in the life of the church, and coming before Him and looking into His eyes, whether it's through the icons, whether it's through the eyes of those whom you trust, whether it's through the eyes of the clergy, or the prayers that open our eyes to see better, or the hymnology to understand the church more. We have to put ourselves in front of God, and we have to not only have the book knowledge, but the faith and the life in the church, because without that, nothing will happen. If you don't have a relationship with God, but you have all the knowledge in the world, it doesn't help us at all, and it never helps us to become closer to God. So in this day and age where everything is instantaneous, where even microwave cooking is too slow, and broadband internet is too slow, and cell phones aren't quick enough to dial, or the voice recognition isn't quick enough and it dials the wrong number when you say, call my house, and all these wonderful devices that are supposed to help us become more efficient and closer to one another. The true relationship with God and with one another is what Patriarch Athenagoras had said several years ago. He said, let us look into one another's eyes, because what better way can you see a person and the Christ in that person than to look at them face to face? And the fathers of the church, I've mentioned this several times before, the fathers and saints of the church say that Hades, and I won't use the other word because there's little kids around, but you know what I'm talking about. If you have the unfortunate instance of going there, is the ability, or the inability, I should say, to see in another person's eyes, to be in the dark, and to be surrounded by people that you can't look into their eyes. You can't speak to them and understand who it's you're talking to. And if you ever think about being a child or even playing hide and go seek and being in a dark room and not being able to see anything, how debilitating that is and how scary that is. And that's what the fathers say that eternal condemnation is. Not to be able to see and not to be able to talk to another person or express yourself to that person, but to know they're there. Now we know God is around us. We know one another is here. We know our family members are here. And this gospel reading today is a reminder to us not to just live in the instantaneous expression of an emotion or an expression of a fact, but it's a call for us to stand up to one another, in front of one another, to speak clearly and to put ourselves in the presence of God and not to expect that instant relationship with God, but to develop it over time and to always look into the eyes of God through the prayers, through the sacraments, and through the beautiful icons that face you and look at you every day. May God be with you this day and always. Amen.